Good afternoon. It is 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. Welcome back to the regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners, serving you since 1851. We are now ready to move to item 11A, and we'll invite up Ms. Young and her colleagues. And this is item 11A, discussion Lane County's equity work across departments. Mo Young, Equity and Access Coordinator, Judy Williams, Strategy and Integration Manager, Laura Vinson, Recruitment Coordinator, and Clay Stillwell, Procurement Manager, all here and crowding up to the table, taking up your space, I believe is the proper term.
Right.
Thank you so much. So, Ms. Young, if you could give us your presentation and kind of an overview of who's doing what, and then how much time, because we forgot to write that on our agenda, how much time you were going to take, and then how much time the board was going to take.
Okay. I just, a little bit of a switch to who is here. We managed to get 2 of our Equity and Access Advisory Board members to take the time out of their day to come. So this is Lynn Anderson and Deborah Butler. And you'll be hearing from them in a little while. I believe that we decided on about 30 minutes of presentation and then 30 minutes of questions.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. So we're just going to take it away. I'm here to give you just a really high-level overview of a couple of the things that I thought maybe needed a little bit more description in the annual kind of list. And then Deborah and Lynn are going to talk about the advisory board. Aaron and Laura are going to talk about HR. And if Clay comes, he will talk about procurement. And if not, it's all there in your packet. So to start, something that's really exciting that we're doing right now is what we're calling Equity 2.0. That's essentially where we're looking at all of the different things that we might be doing with regards to equity and working with a consultant to take directors, you all during a work session, the Equity and Education Committee, the E2 Committee, and the GARE cohort, which I'll get to in a second, through working on creating a list of priorities and then deciding out of this giant list that I'm sure that everyone will come up with what our top 3 or 4 are. That process started last Monday and it'll end on December 9th. So we'll have something to come back to you all with probably early next year, just kind of refocusing in on what we're doing. So the purpose of that, I'm going to read it to you, is to establish equity priorities for the county that unify, focus, and motivate staff and leadership. So we've been really good at saying yes to a lot of things. I'm sure that's not something that's unfamiliar to you. And it's become really clear that we really need to focus in on a handful of priorities. So there's a lot we could be doing. And when we don't focus, we run the risk of being spread too thin and over-promising to the community. So we're kind of taking that to heart and working on it. I mentioned the GARE cohort. So the GARE is the Government Alliance of Race and Equity. It's a national network of local governments working to achieve racial equity and advance opportunities for all. There are 155 member jurisdictions across the country, so we are one of those member jurisdictions. And they have regional cohorts working on creating plans and processes within their jurisdictions to advance racial equity at home. And so there are 8 folks from across Lane County that are participating in the cohort. It's a monthly trip to either Portland or Seattle. There's a couple that are online. And we're learning how to normalize conversations about race, operationalize new policies and cultures, and organize to achieve racial equity. And so we're about halfway through that. And one of the things that's really wonderful about that cohort is that we're getting to meet folks who are doing the same work as we are in jurisdictions that are close to home. So in Portland and Seattle and Spokane. And that's really giving us folks who have the same experiences, kind of similar populations, who are looking at hiring or policies, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's a pretty exciting thing that's coming out of that. I'm going to talk just briefly about Equity and Education Committee. I know Aaron's going to talk more about that. So the Equity and Education Committee is our internal county level equity committee. It's made up from folks from all departments and all levels of employees. And the purpose of that committee is to share information and build awareness of equity focus throughout the county, to incubate and spread equity, to institutionalize equity work, and to support education and training opportunities. I'm gonna let Erin talk about the training opportunities, but I wanted to pull out a couple of things that did come out of, we call it the E2 committee, out of the E2 committee this year. One thing that's really exciting that I'll go more in depth in just a second is employee resource groups. We've been talking about mindfulness, the news, and supporting employees. We've been talking about it at supervisor manager meetings, but it came out of an equity and education committee meeting. And then also looking at how do we coordinate what community events we're purchasing tables at and who sits at those tables. Next year, what we're looking forward to is creating kind of an internal campaign, posters about equity and inclusion and diversity, supporting whatever the work that comes out of this Equity 2.0 process, and then increased interdepartmental communication about equity work that's happening across the organization. So that's kind of what's on deck. And then finally, the last thing is the employee resource groups. So I mentioned that came out of the E2 committee. So an employee resource group is a county-sponsored, voluntarily formed, employee-run group that promotes equity, access, and inclusion values in the efforts of Lane County. It promotes personal and professional growth for county employees with common interests, identities, and experiences. And they've been shown across the nation in public and private sectors to improve employee retention by reducing isolation and providing a stronger sense of community within the agency, so in this case, within the county. We're piloting 2 employee resource groups starting in January. We'll have one for people of color and one for folks who are LGBTQIA+. And so we're working pretty hard on getting, all of that information ready to go out to employees, and then also planning to kind of listening sessions, open houses for folks who have questions that need to be answered in person. So that's a super high level of the things that I was thinking you might want to hear about on that really big list. And we'll go kind of down this row, and then if I didn't talk about something, you'll let me know.
Good afternoon. My name is Lynn Anderson. I'm Ojibwa, French, and Irish. And I'd say that to you because the one thing I'm pretty good at is relationships. I like to build relationships. And equity is about building relationships. I am absolutely honored and humbled to have been able to be one of the original board members on the Equity and Access Board as a board member. We have grown tremendously. As with all new groups, you figure out which direction you want to head in. And then sometimes the wind comes along and kind of blows you a little bit away. And if you're over in Florence, it really can sidetrack you. So what we found was that when we first got started, we were all really concerned about our relationships amongst each other. And so it was being very careful not to step on each other's toes. Everything was pretty warm and fuzzy until we had a bump. And that bump told us that we couldn't be warm and fuzzy all the time, that sometimes the hard conversations have to happen. And then we learned how to have those hard conversations with ourselves, amongst ourselves, to start the growth forward. Because equity starts at the foundation. It's at the core. And we all believe in equity, but when we were being cautious with each other, it wasn't actually equitable because we weren't addressing the issues that were at the table. So in moving through that, what we learned was that sometimes speaking out isn't always comfortable for everybody, which I can't imagine that you guys would know anything about that, right? No. But in the processes, that's what we figured out, was how to build the processes. So we really started with a blank sheet of paper, and from that, we have started doing some really important and good work, and I'm proud to be a part of that important work. I represent Western Lane County, and I'm the squeaky wheel that comes from over the hill, and I squeak a lot. And what we found was that it's a systems, and systems have to build relationships, and that's something that I think the Equity Board is really getting good at. We've heard from 3 departments, and those have been really informational. And tomorrow evening on 11/6, we will be hearing from the HR department, and I'm looking forward to that on pay equity. It's a big issue. It's something that comes up quite often, and it's a good issue to look at. And it's been around for a long time, so it's time for us to start looking at all the way across the board. Some examples of things that have been implemented or that we were able to initiate change on, and based on recommendations, included the hate crime information on the SO page for the county website and in-person training for new deputies. And speaking to you as a Native woman who looks like a white woman, I can walk in the 2 worlds not easily, because I don't live in one as easily as I live in the other. And that was something that we found when we started looking in the processes, is that sometimes it's real easy to make an assumption about what somebody is, about what their story is. And so that was a dialogue that we opened up, and I'm glad that we did. You know, it was a challenging conversation, but we moved it. And hopefully it will be better for the new deputies coming on board down the line. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Deborah Butler. Lynn and I were actually co-chairs last year of the Equity and Access Advisory Board. So it's nice that we're presenting together here today. I also am Chief of Staff at Lane Community College, so that's what I do during the day. So she's talked about some of the things that we've done over the last year, and I'm going to talk a little more specifically about one project that we worked on recently, which was in looking at the your rules of decorum for public comment at your meetings. Specifically, our reports and recommendations task force looked at your existing documents and made some recommendations. And we heard back from staff that there are some things that have already been changed. Those things are a change of the public meeting sign-in sheet to include pronouns and remove the physical address section. To expand upon the current green and yellow red light system by increasing the yellow warning time from 30 seconds to 1 minute to give speakers more advance notice. Create a system that applies to everyone regarding how handouts and materials are given to the board to create equity in that process. Expectations, instructions, and standards for behavior have been established and are posted clearly on the website for anybody in the public to view at any time. Public outreach on the part of the county, including a clear how to make a public comment instructions, and removed bias language from the Decorum and Order document, which was your original document, and we hope that that'll be helpful to you. There are additional items that were recommended that will require some resources and probably some time and planning to put together. Among those are translation of signage, existing signage, and perhaps having interpreters present at meetings. Adding a column to the sign-in sheet for first-time testifiers so that they can have, we can make sure that there's extra guidance and information available to them if they are not sure how the process works. Identifying a non-board member to act as a timekeeper to sort of change that dynamic. Turning off the microphone when the 3-minute time limit has been reached. Exploring ways to use technology to increase public participation, especially from remote areas, rural areas. Perhaps providing quality childcare at meetings so that parents with children are able to attend, and then rotating locations for increased access and opportunities for public comment from different locations within the county. This was a really good example, I think, of a project that we worked on together that was a request from you all to us to provide some guidance on, and we were really glad to be able to collaborate to provide that to you.
And I just want to clarify the first things that Deborah listed, the one thing that has been, or the 2 things that have been changed is how handouts and materials are given to the board and the sign-in sheet. The rest are what staff identified as kind of low-hanging fruit. They wouldn't take extra resource each meeting, but they haven't quite been done.
All right. Thank you, Chair Sorensen and Commissioners, for this opportunity. My name is Erin Rollins, and I work in Human Resources, and I have oversight over countywide training programs as well as organizational development work. So as part of that portfolio, that includes the diversity and equity-related training initiatives that we have. So in April of 2017, Lane County adopted a policy that would ensure our values around diversity, equity, and respect were supported by creating an annual 3-year diversity training requirement for all regular status employees. Learning activities should, and this is coming straight out of our Administrative Procedures Manual, demonstrate the county's commitment to diversity and cultural competency by raising awareness, allowing for self-reflection, and include opportunities for employees to become aware of the wide array of cultural values, beliefs, and assumptions that define our world. This requirement can be met through a variety of ways to ensure that the training is relevant and meaningful to each individual employee as well as to the work that they do in the community. We require that all training be pre-approved by the employee's supervisor and be completed on paid time. The training could include a variety of classes or learning activities both offered within the county, things that we do ourselves, or out in the community as well. Some examples of the Lane County training that are offered include monthly diversity sack lunches, where we coordinate with departments to bring in guest speakers, or other speaker events, such as we've brought in the Oregon Commission of the Blind recently for something. We have monthly diversity-related film showings with discussions. We offer tours of United Way partner agencies to learn about the communities they serve. We offer an Equity 101 course, which we feel is a foundational course around equity and diversity concepts here at the county that we are now happy to be offering 4 times a year. That course is facilitated by 6 equity facilitators, which is a program that came out of that Equity and Education Committee that Mo spoke of earlier. And it provides career development opportunities for our employees to learn how to train equity courses, and they make a 1-year commitment to then be training these courses throughout the year. We have 2 equity summits a year. These also are coordinated through the Equity and Education Committee. These have rotating topics, and so our most recent summit, we had approximately 100 employees from across the county at all levels here in Harris Hall learning about equity lenses. Other topics in the past have included bringing in Transponder to talk about gender identity, hidden bias training, ally training, and facilitating equity conversations, to name just a few. We have diversity-related topics also woven into our regular training. So we offer a class on hiring basics to our supervisors. We have a section on hidden bias in the hiring process woven into that class, as well as a class for anyone sitting on interview panels. Many of our departments are also actively creating diversity and equity-related trainings to support their needs. So it's not just coming from human resources. And all of our employees who participate on either departmental or broader equity committees can apply their hours working on those committees towards meeting those diversity requirements. Mo, Laura, and I are available to assist work groups and teams with creating workshops or doing customized training, or sometimes just coming in to speak about the work that we're doing on a broader front to those employee groups. As mentioned earlier, employees can also go into outside learning activities to meet the requirements, so things out in the community. Some of these examples include attending equity or diversity-related trainings through their professional organizations, volunteering at cultural festivals or other community events, attending diversity-related events, speakers, or exhibits offered throughout the community, for example, University of Oregon, City of Eugene, City of Springfield, NAACP, and other community organizations often have great events in the community that we try to promote to employees. Attendance at the First Friday Communities of Color networking events can work towards this requirement, as well as attending broader community conversations and community forums that are scheduled periodically. All of the diversity-related training is tracked in LEAP, our learning management system. This enables us to report on the training throughout the course of the year. With the adoption of our new data analytics tool, Tableau, that we're adopting countywide, we are going to have greater ability to do more dynamic reporting and dashboards, and so that's coming soon to be able to report on this. Just in terms of some information, as of November 1st, we had 3,021 learning activities logged in LEAP by our employees. That totaled 7,868 hours of training completed to date. Approximately 67% of our Lane County employees have met their 3-hour requirement or exceeded it, and we do tend to have quite a few employees exceeding that requirement each year. Our main focus now is to encourage those employees who have hours remaining to go ahead and wrap up their learning, help departments if they need assistance with coming up with some creative events, and start planning our 2020 offerings. So with that, I'll turn it over to Laura.
Hello. Good afternoon, Board Chair Sorensen and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and share some information with you today. As you may or may not be aware, the Recruitment and Selection Coordinator position was developed in 2015 at the request of the Board to improve recruitment, selection, retention, and advancement at Lane County. When I accepted this position in April of 2016, I was tasked with some specific equity-related goals: to improve access to all open jobs at Lane County, to increase the diversity of our applicant pools, and to then translate that increase in diverse applicants to hires. With these goals in mind, we developed an application workshop, and I went around town, all over the place, Oak Ridge, Junction City, Veneta, Cottage Grove, Florence, to facilitate this workshop. And by being open, transparent, and sharing information about our application process, we've increased the number of total applications received year over year since tracking this information started in 2014. The primary goal of this workshop is to inform interested individuals about the different steps in our very competitive selection process and to hopefully assist them in submitting better application materials, thereby improving their chances of becoming employed at Lane County. Another identified need, we added more inclusive ethnicity and gender options for applicants when filling out their application. This happened in late 2017, and this has resulted in less than 1% of our applicants selecting unknown when they're filling out our application process. And as a member of the Equity Community Consortium, I mean, we have an HR group and we sit down and talk about our metrics, and folks are like, they can't believe that less than 1% of our applicants select unknown. So that's a big win. Okay, a sampling of the organizations we partner with to facilitate this application workshop are sponsors, the Siletz Tribe, the NAACP, the ARC of Lane County, and the Veterans Administration. Other outreach done throughout Lane County to increase diversity of applicant pools and hires are the Centralized Internship Program. This program was developed at the request of the county administrator with the goal to hire individuals from underrepresented groups. Each internship posting specifically states the following internship will be offered with particular emphasis on providing career opportunities to historically underrepresented individuals to professional careers at Lane County, which may include but are not limited to first-generation college students, low-income students, students who identify as LGBTQ+, students of color, veterans, and those with diverse abilities. In 2019, we've hosted 5 interns to date. And since the introduction of the Centralized Internship Program in winter of 2017, we've hosted 40 interns, hired 6 of them into regular full-time positions, and 5 into part-time or temporary positions. Of those 11 folks that have been hired through that program, 8 identify as a race other than white. We've hosted 2 interns from the Oregon Commission for the Blind. We've hosted 2 interns over the summer through the University of Oregon Student Athlete Internship Program. Mo was lucky enough to get Hunter Kent Moyer. We hosted a training from the University Professor Chris Knowles on working with folks with diverse abilities. We've implemented new candidate sourcing tools, including a talent network to diversify our applicant pools. I've had the pleasure and privilege of being an employer panelist for the ARC of Lane County. I've been on the job fair board for the Lane County Stand Down for Veterans. I've attended career fairs in Florence, 4 high school career fairs, Springfield, Elmira, Eugene. I've even started attending Elevate Lane County events. I don't know if y'all know, they have career days for middle school students now. So I had the opportunity to take some folks from engineering and transportation as well as the CHC, and we had a really cool booth. Usually when it's just me talking, they just walk right by. So they hung out and it was really cool. Okay. And we hosted our 3rd annual Lane County Day for U of O 3 PM students. We had 15 students participate this year. What has all this outreach done? All of this outreach has resulted in more diverse applicant pools for open positions. For perspective, in 2018, we received 7,521 applications for 370 job postings. 22.78 of those applicants identified as a race other than white. And to date, for 2019, we received 6,536 applications for 329 job postings. So I love analytics, so predicting how many we'll receive for the rest of the year, we're gonna beat that 7,521 from last year, which is awesome. The most exciting piece for me is that 24% of those folks that have applied to date identify as a race other than white, which is an increase year over year. When we started tracking this in 2014, that was at 15%. So hires across departments and classifications to date, around 337 people-ish as of October 30th. 24% of those hires identify as a race other than white. So those are kind of some outcomes that we're seeing from recruitment efforts. And Clay's not here for me to introduce, so to you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your presentations, all of you. Before we get into our questions and comments, I wonder how many of you have been reading the Old Oregon or Oregon Quarterly magazine since March of 1919. I have not, but I've been reading it since 1967. And they changed the name from Old Oregon to Oregon Quarterly, and they named 100 ducks who made a difference. 100 years of innovators, inventors, game changers, trailblazers, humanitarians, inspirations to us all. And among the people that didn't make the list were Oregon Governor Tom McCall, Philip Knight, the founder and CEO of Nike. And among the people that did make the list are William Roth. You may recall he's the senator that started the Roth IRA. Maureen Neuberger, one of the first women, maybe the only woman from Oregon in the U.S. Senate. John Paul Jones, who designed the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. Corazon Aquino, president of the Philippines, and Mo Young. That is correct. She is one of the 100 ducks in history. You know, some people were pretty upset about the Philip Knight thing, but a few letters to the editor. But I just wanted to mention that we do have someone really special in our organization, and I don't know if anybody said this recently up here, and I just wanted to thank Mo for not only choosing to do this work, but to do it with us. I did want to ask a question. I think you mentioned about the board meetings and that sort of thing. We've had suggestions over the years for sign language, American Sign Language, or more recently for transcription of the meetings, and we kind of haven't done that, I think primarily because of money. But I'm wondering if there are other things. You mentioned we've implemented, or maybe Mo mentioned, we've implemented a little bit more with the sign-up sheets, and I'm sure the way we have currently with the timer, I'm sure we could fix the timer from 30 seconds to 1 minute on the yellow, and it would be a big help to anybody that's board chair to just have the microphone cut off. I'm not quite sure what the technology of that is. I'm wondering what kind of follow-up could we have on that? Who would do that?
Well, so those things were on the list of recommendations that we made, and it sounds like, so staff has already reported back that those things are being worked on.
Okay.
So that's excellent. In terms of interpreters, it's a challenge, of course, because there's a cost associated with that. And so I guess that my best recommendation is that you all probably know better than us what kind of interpreters would be most useful in specific areas, but it might be something that you could consider even periodically if it's communicated to the community so that everyone knows, when that would be available.
Okay, I just don't want that to be left behind, that it's something. And the way we set this up also is your group is really advisory to the county administrator. So we don't always maybe hear what you're doing. So this is good to have a check-in like this. And I'm sure other commissioners will have plenty to ask about. So who wants to be recognized? Commissioner Buck.
I tend to start these things, I've noticed. Well, I want to at first thank you for all your volunteer time that you're putting onto this particular board. It is extremely beneficial to the community in general and for us as policymakers to incorporate all your thoughts and interests in what we're doing. So thank you for doing that. I know that people don't have to volunteer, and you're doing it out of the benefit to the community. So I appreciate that very much. The recommendations on meeting decorum are great. I'm the timer keeper right here, so I always thought that was kind of strange, that it wasn't somebody next to the person. But I think there's lots of great suggestions here that we can incorporate. One of the ones that stood out to me personally was childcare at meetings. As a mom of a little one, I always appreciate it when I see little folks come in here to the meetings, because it's rare, really. We saw it more when we were talking about the birth center earlier in the year, and I just think it's so important that those that are younger or families feel like they can come and not have that barrier. I feel it when I go to meetings too. As a commissioner up here, I go to meetings and there isn't necessarily childcare in the evening or off school hours. And I can feel that hurdle personally. I really want to go to an evening meeting, yet, you feel like you can't because you don't want your child to, quote unquote, make a scene. They're probably just playing and being themselves. And I think it's important that we know here and we welcome them here, and that's okay. And so that is actually probably one of the more expensive items that you have on your list, though. But it's something that I would like us to be able to talk about more in the future, as it's so important and we are not getting the input from key folks in our community because of that one hurdle. So I'd love to be able to explore that in the future, but recognize that that's also probably a pretty good expense. At one time, I heard that we had childcare for employees here at the community, and times were different then, of course. But that we have such a problem with affordable childcare here in our community. And I'd really like to find ways to address that. And there are discussions at the regional solutions level, at the state level, trying to address some of those things too, from what I hear. But it would be good to have discussions here at the county level on how we might be able to make it more inclusive for parents with little ones to attend.
Okay, any other commissioners? I'll just mention when I was on the board at Lane Community College, I had a 4-year-old, and the board decided that we couldn't afford to have childcare at board meetings. So I brought my 4-year-old to an executive session of the LCC board, and some of the other board members' views on childcare somewhat changed after Eric made his presence known. So just sometimes we might want to do that too. Yes, sir.
I don't know exactly. First of all, hey, Mo, it's good to see you in this capacity. I don't know how this does or doesn't fit, but I want to make you aware that I'm sitting on, among other things for this board, on the Housing Policy Board. And the Housing Policy Board is about to announce recruitment for another board member, and the group really wants to be more diverse. And so I don't know how your group might assist with that, but I'm assuming if I give that information to you, Mo, that you can circulate it so that they can get candidates that would make for a more diverse group.
Yep.
I also want to share thanks to this board's allowing me commissioners a small budget. I'm going to be engaging from time to time a young man in the Springfield community named Johannes Tadeo as an interpreter, as I have meetings with the Hispanic community of Springfield. And so I'm just sharing. I'm not commenting on your good work. I'm just saying I'm trying to participate with you. I also don't know if you all know, but one of the components of community benefit agreements, which this board has unanimously embraced around the courthouse and hopefully other construction and other projects, is workforce diversity, but it has teeth attached to it. And that comes from the building trades, which historically have included literally quotas that are above the demographics of their community amongst those historically not participating fully in the workforce for recruitment into registered apprenticeship programs for jobs right then and there, supervised by journey level people on projects and with a commitment from those unions to keep them employed. And in that regard, when we do, I know Mo will be invited to a workshop from actually President Obama's Undersecretary of the Department of Labor, who really focused on these things. And when that does occur, I'm just sharing with you, not for kudos, but to enlist your support and participation, that the areas that are really focused on for recruitment are women, minorities, and veterans, at least in the building trades. And there are state and national organizations that we would be bringing into Lane County that have an infrastructure helping community groups recruit from those populations. So I just wanted to share that. And then my last thing, and I hope that it's okay, as I heard our chairman rattle off all these names, I would like to share another name, just use this opportunity to. And that name is a graduate from the University of Oregon named John Nisby. And for those of you that don't know that name, Mr. Nisby was part of a group that broke the color barrier for the Washington Redskins when President Kennedy was president and was pushing integration of the Redskins. He was an all-NFL player for 7 years. He graduated from here. I actually lived with and worked for him in DC, and that's another name that's not on that list, but that has had a powerful impact on thousands of lives. And he's a graduate right here at the U of O. So anyway, commendations on your good work. One question. Anyone? Equity 2.0. If in fact 5 years from now we're looking and saying that was successful, what would we see that's different?
I'm gonna go ahead and just answer it. So what I think we would see is different is we would see that the employees of Lane County either reflect the place we live or perhaps the country we live in, not just Lane County, but the United States, and that folks are staying, right? Because they feel safe, because they feel valued, because they're getting paid living wages, because they're able to take care of their families. And that's going to be broader than just this agency, right? So if I move into this community and I have a family, I have to worry about my kids, and I might have to worry about my partner or my spouse. And so that's going to take some of that partnership that Laura was mentioning about the Equity and Community Consortium. But I think we have this really great opportunity to create an agency that makes people want to stay beyond just financial needs.
I don't know, but my thought is if you can somehow measure that, you'll be able to impact a lot of other areas as well. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Burney, for looking to the future and posing that, not just an interesting question, but an important question. You were pretty well equipped to answer it. Clearly, you've thought about it, Mo. I'm going to look into the past a little bit further, however, back to 2013, 2014, when the roots of this committee were really in the formative stages. And I remember spending lots and lots of evenings up in 256 with you at the whiteboard, taking down notes after notes after notes after notes as to how do we begin to balance the inequity that existed in Lane County government for all the years prior to that. And really, from my perspective, we didn't know where to begin. We had a relatively small group of people that gave you a lot of input, and I got to be a fly on the wall and participate as well. And Mo and Lynn, you were there not too long after that, right after we formed the Equity and Access Advisory Board. We didn't even know what the outcome needed to be or how we were going to move forward. And the ultimate outcome of that, the greatest outcome of that, was this committee. This is the direction we decided to go, is that a committee of citizens who would provide direct input, incisive input, as to not just the way it was and the way it is, but to address Commissioner Burney's question, how can we be? And 5 years from now, what do we want to look like? And I've had an opportunity to sit in on a number of meetings, and the type of dialogue that goes back and forth between the members is just amazing. You know, from the very first meeting where people were kind of shy to speak. Lynn, you were at that very first meeting. People were shy to speak. And there was a pretty large number of people at the table upstairs here. But you got over the shyness pretty quickly, and very quickly developed a work plan that, and it didn't hurt one bit that when the director of the program was hired, it happened to be the person who formed the program, which was Mo. So, you know, the history that got us to this point doesn't take us into the future, but it gives us a launching pad for the future. And that is really where we are today. What can we do, Commissioner Burney, 5 years from now? What do we want to look like 5 years from now and beyond that? Because it really is exciting what has happened. You know, we were able to integrate into our first strategic plan when we first had a formal strategic plan with the strategies, goals, et cetera. 2.3 was just very basic. It was to ensure equity and access. Oh my gosh, that's a very simple statement, but what you've done from there is you've taken that 2.3 in 2014 and really built a structure that is going to, once again, Commissioner Burnell, look at you, launches into the future to where we can be, where you just expressed, Mo, that we can look back and say, this is what we've done. I am so proud to have been a fly on the wall watching this occur. And Lynn, that you've stuck with it all this time, and you continue to. It's been a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner?
I don't have a whole lot to add. I do, think that we've made some great strides, and I like the timeline starts back in 2014 as we looked at replacing what was kind of a dysfunctional Human Rights Commission in previous versions of this that really didn't work towards improvement. It was mostly about going, blowing things up and making issues out of things than it was about how do we make things better. And I really like the change that we've made and the work that we're doing to improve our retention and recruitment. The only thing I have is a little bit of a warning, and that's about making assumptions about homogeneity of groups and identity politics. One of the things my wife and I have had the pleasure of doing is hosting exchange students. And we've hosted exchange students from various parts of the world, one of which was from Mexico. And there'd be an assumption that, when he went to North Eugene, at the time we were living in North Eugene's capture area, he'd have, a fair amount of friends there. Well, he did not fit in at all with the population because he was of Spanish descent and very clearly, from the upper class and basically was ostracized by his Hispanic classmates, as a papa's boy and a rich kid and everything else. And the assumption that just because somebody has, is a member of a group that we measure, Hispanic, that they're all the same, is a dangerous thing we can get into at times. It's like looking at this table and going, well, we have one woman and 5 old white guys. If you took a picture of us, that would be the assumption. But if you let us start talking, you immediately know one of us is an immigrant. And if you let us talk further, you'll see a wide diversity in background on this board. So I just wanted, as we make strides, and we're doing very good work, I think, in this area, do be careful about assumptions around homogeneity, and that just because you're identified as a member of some minority group that you're all the same. I'll leave it at that.
Can I respond to that really?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right that assumptions are really, really dangerous. And I think there's something about, I know that there's something about being a biracial, white passing woman that works in county admin that makes my experience really different from the folks in my office. And some of the initiatives that we're talking about, employee resource groups, those sorts of things, give people like me in the county an opportunity to connect with people that have shared experience. So not that our experience is all the same, but that we can relate to something that we maybe can't relate to the folks who are in our immediate surroundings about. And that relation will reduce isolation and make me feel more, and people like me feel more connected to the organization. And so the hope is not that we will, or the plan is not that we will have everyone, under the same exact definition, but that we will give folks who have experiences that are different within the organization, within the community, a chance to connect and really support one another around those experiences, because it's hard. And so I appreciate your cautionary words, and I wanted to just make sure that you didn't think that that's what we're doing, because it's not what we're doing.
I appreciate that.
I have a question for you. That is, tomorrow we have the work session on equity priorities. I'm wondering if you could give us a little preview of that, of what that is about, as opposed to what today is about.
So the consultant that I was speaking about, Terrell Thompson, is going to come. We've got, I think, an hour with y'all. And they've created a PowerPoint that is now available online. And it basically goes through the conversation that we had with directors. So they facilitated a conversation last Monday with, I think, 5 of the directors around equity priorities. So it's going to talk about what came out of that, and then the question, there'll be a lot of dialogue, and then the main question for you all is, what sort of resonates with you from what came out of that conversation and what's missing? So we're looking at external, internal, any sort of equity priority you can possibly think of, but in an effort to try to just kind of get the juices flowing, because we only have an hour, they'll talk about what came out of that meeting first.
Okay. I just want to ask everybody up there, do you have any, one sentence request? Like, if you could just make a request, and maybe just to put words in my own mouth, childcare at board meetings, or more pay for lower end people, or, I don't know, just, could I just get a sentence from each of you?
Want me to start?
Don't say you guys when talking to the Board of Commissioners. That's one of our favorites up here.
I wasn't planning on it, but one thing, I think, so we are, this is going to be more than a sentence, I'm sorry. We're prioritizing the work, and even so, there's a lot of work. And so my hope is that as we move forward into the future with programs and with policies, and as we add things to, this kind of equity portfolio, that we think about how to resource it in a way that will set us all up for success. That was a paragraph, I'm sorry.
Basing this on my experience as a director of a large after-school program, and childcare was the priority. I can tell you that building relationships within your community in the areas that you wouldn't even think, to start pulling those resources in, and it's not going to cost, that you're not looking at as high a cost as you were thinking. People love kids. It just makes it a little bit easier. It's just finding competent people, but they're there.
I guess I would like to see all of us, I guess, have a better, deeper understanding of the space that we take up and the social areas that we inhabit, and the space and the power that we have when we come to a table to make a decision. So that would be my hope.
Coming from a learning and development end, I think just continued high priority on employee growth and development consistently across the county.
I'd have to say required implicit bias training for all staff as our workforce becomes more diverse around gender identities, ethnicities, age, 5 generations in the workplace. I think it's real important that everyone understands how to be inclusive of staff. That will help with retention, engagement. So that would be my ask.
All right. Thank you. So we'll see Ms. Young tomorrow. And we want to thank all of you today, particularly our guests from the outside world that aren't paid to be here. So thank you so much for your volunteering and being a part of this. So we are now ready to move over to our Public Works item number 12A. And Ms. Kepler, our county engineer, and others. Let's see if I can read your name properly here. Moria Papagallo. Was that accurate?
It was close.
Okay. Well, I will ask when you get set up there to give us your proper name. So this is the work session and discussion in the matter of stormwater program changes and funding shortfalls. Dan Hurley, who is here in spirit, our Public Works Director, Peggy Kepler, County Engineer. And then if you could allow our guest to introduce herself. Welcome.
Moria Papagallo.
Moria Papagallo. Well, welcome, and we set this up for a 20-minute presentation. So, Ms. Kepler, if you'd like to start off, that'd be great.
Thank you, Commissioners. It's good to be here. We have quite a meaty topic for you this afternoon. We've been working with our stormwater issues for many years, but a number of things have changed this recent year. And Moria is going to tell you a little bit about her background in environmental work and also the stormwater program changes that we're looking at now and in the future. And I do know that Dan will be here shortly. And I will probably leave a little bit early if this runs too long. So I'm going to turn it over to Moria.
Look who's come in the door, right as we are ready. Sorry, we started a little early.
All right, that's good. All right. And maybe, I know that Dan might have something to say before Moria gets ready too.
All right. Have you already introduced Moria?
I did.
Okay. So we're just very excited to have Moria. Hopefully, Peggy gave you a little bit of her background, but she's okay, she didn't. Okay, well, we got her from, she was working up in Portland for an engineering firm for 14 years, but got her back here in Lane County. She grew up here in Deadwood, and not too many people from there, but she's of high caliber, knows her engineering, sharp engineer, and if we're only going to have one stormwater person, this is our first FTE dedicated strictly to stormwater. I'm glad it's Moria because she is very sharp, able to grasp the complexity of this, which she's going to talk to you about. Our stormwater programs are very complex with the different permits and the relationships with the different cities, and it's just going to get more complicated with new requirements coming down in the permit. We knew we were going to need to have a full FTE dedicated to this. Excuse me, I rushed over here. But knowing where there's a large body of work that needs to happen in a short period of time, so we needed to add a position. And so happy to have Moria here. So with that, why don't you dive into the coming changes, and then I'll wrap up at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. So the intent of this presentation is really to give you an overview of kind of where we've been with our stormwater program and where we're going. So I'm going to start off with some of the environmental permits that regulate our stormwater program. So first off, we have the Clean Water Act, and the programs associated with that are the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. I'm going to just call that the Npdes program for short. And that really looks at, in our urban core, how we deal with both the subsurface stormwater infrastructure, so catch basins, pipes, and also the roadside ditches, and how that storm infrastructure then discharges. It allows us to discharge to waters of the state. And then there's the Tmdl program, so it's a total maximum daily load. And that's for impaired water bodies. So we have one right now for the Willamette River, and it's focused on reducing pollutant loads in the Willamette River associated with temperature, mercury, and bacteria. And then there's the Water Pollution Control Facilities Permit. This is more, if you've heard of UICs or dry wells, this is when we take our stormwater from impervious areas generally and discharge it to groundwater. So there's permit requirements associated with how we inject our stormwater and into water sources. So groundwater sources are often a drinking water source. So I'm going to focus primarily on changes to the Npdes and the Tmdl programs. And then, and really, I should say that when we talk about these permits and these requirements, it always leads into flood control. Stormwater runoff has a tendency, or affects, especially in our urban core, flooding. And there's also some new requirements in our environmental permits that really are associated with flow control as well. So that does tie in. So the Npdes program, really just to give some background here, EPA set standards that then Oregon DEQ is in charge of enforcing. Right now, so back in the 90s, there were 2 levels of pollutant sources it's really associated with population. So you have higher pollutants in stormwater associated with the number of people that are on the road systems and in the surrounding areas. So for the phase 1 programs, those are like City of Eugene, City of Portland, Clackamas County. Those were communities that back in the 90s were larger than 100,000 population. And then you have the phase 2 communities. So those are Lane County, City of Springfield, several other counties and cities that are all, back in the 90s, were around 50,000 people. So they're considered to be a smaller population, smaller potential for pollutant entering into the stormwater system. So they did that based on prioritization. And so back in 1990, the City of Eugene had their phase 1 permit implemented, and then in 2007, Lane County and the City of Springfield we developed our stormwater program. And this program historically focused on the requirements are associated with really how we coordinate with the public about stormwater and understanding of pollutant sources, how we minimize discharges to our stormwater system from outside sources, that's illicit discharge elimination, and then really development and how we look at future development for construction site runoff. So that's looking at when you have large disturbed areas and you have sediment-laden water getting into the stormwater system. And then there's post-construction stormwater management. So that's after you've developed a site and looking at maintaining quality and quantity of stormwater, where that goes, and then the quantity of that stormwater. And then there's municipal operations, maintaining our infrastructure. And our historic permit was less prescriptive. It said you will develop a program, you will enforce a program, and it really left that up to the county to develop that, and it was very specific to the county in that it was an individual permit and not a general permit, like the new permit that we're now under. And through that, we were actually able to come up with some really fiscally conservative ways to implement that program through intergovernmental agreements with the cities of Springfield and Eugene, and really and make that a process that worked pretty well. Now with the new general permit, there's some key changes associated with level of effort in all of these areas. The really important ones are associated with development. So we have, at our previous permit, there were requirements associated with development of 1 acre or more and how stormwater is managed. So that's associated with needing to manage, so if it's the old permit was an acre, needing to manage the disturbed areas and as well as quantity and quality. Now we have a 1/4 of an acre requirement. So that's threshold has gone down significantly. And the other thing that we're dealing with now is there's a lot more private development that we now have to oversee. And we now also have, once they've developed their stormwater infrastructure, we're now required for the life of that stormwater infrastructure to make sure that it's maintained properly and monitored. So there's a lot of additional requirements moving forward. Right now, we divide our workload throughout the county, or throughout the Public Works Department, across the 4 divisions. The biggest FTE is really in our road maintenance program. And then the funding is primarily through our road fund. There's declining revenue in the road fund, and really the new general permit is requiring increased non-road stormwater mandates. So that also is going to be a factor here in how we look at revenue for this. We have the intergovernmental agreements in place that cover most of what we're doing currently. That's split, the payments for those are split up between the 4 public works divisions. Road maintenance and engineering construction services is about 50%, and that's primarily road fund. And then waste management and land management cover the other 40%. So, and those are non-road fund sources. Quick look at the area of our MS4, the area that we have to manage the Npdes program in. So historically, with our old permits since 2007, we've been doing it within the UGBs, so that's the yellow areas, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And then there's an urbanized zone that the U.S. Census puts together and says this is basically where development is going. And that is the area in green. And so that is all outside of the UGB, and it is twice the area of what we've been having to manage stormwater on through our Npdes program historically. So there's not only a increase in responsibilities associated with these permits, but there is also an increase in area, a doubling in area. So I've talked about the Npdes program. I'm going to talk about overall system. The stormwater program here, this is basically a work forecast that we've put together. Each of the three permits that I've been discussing and the work required in order to meet the components of the permit. Most of the work is mandated to be, or required to be completed by 2023, and that's code updates, additional work associated with, developing likely new permits. We still need to work through all of those processes, and then there's a long-term planning effort, and this is all outlined in the handout that I provided to you. The other thing that we have that was kind of more of the NPDES updates. And then we have the TMDL and the WPCF permits. Those are renewed every 5 years, and there are significant efforts that we're doing this year associated with our system-wide assessments, monitoring plans, things like that, that are required every 5 years. And so these are efforts that are coming around regularly. And really, the biggest workload and the biggest financial cost associated with this program is in system maintenance. About 80 to 90% of our budget for this program is spent on maintaining our existing infrastructure. And really, right now, we're starting to look at some of our existing infrastructure in a much closer fashion. The infrastructure that we currently have in the county was constructed in the 60s, and it's nearing its end of life. We have a variety of subsurface concerns that we need to be proactive in looking at and preparing for retrofits and replacements. And really, this is going to be an ongoing process. We have a contract in place right now where we're just looking at the River Road Santa Clara area. But we also have north of Springfield and also south of Springfield, there are areas where we have a lot of subsurface infrastructure as well that we need to maintain and address. And this all comes down to really looking at what's happening in the future, what workloads, what cost. This is all outlined on that handout as well. What we've done here is we've projected under the estimated expense row, we've looked at everything that needs to be done. We've looked at the FTEs that are needed, some equipment, and look at all of the submittals and come up with an estimated cost. These are really rough numbers. We're just kind of taking a first pass at what we're looking at. And then we went and looked at basically the 2018-2019 actuals. So this is what we spent last year in our stormwater program, that $2.6 million. And we took that added cost of living increase to it throughout each year and compared it to that estimated expense that we have listed, and we're able to look at what work we have listed under the budget shortfall. So where are we lacking in our funding at this time, where we're going to be more burdened in the road fund and looking at future financial needs there. So a couple things to point out on this. We're looking at adding a couple FTE in a couple different departments, continuing on with the stormwater infrastructure assessment, and then retrofits. And then kind of how that breaks down into each division in Public Works. So on the management side of things, it's looking at about 3 FTE for construction, engineering construction services, land management in order to manage the new workload associated with private development. That could be on the order of 3 FTE. And then road maintenance would be an increase of potentially 4 FTE in order to complete the workload needed. One other item that I do want to touch on is our Tmdl requirements. As I mentioned before, we have a Tmdl in place for the Willamette River for temperature, bacteria, and mercury that the county has an implementation plan, or has had an implementation plan since 2008, and every 5 years we update that. There's a series of activities that we put together and tell DEQ that we are implementing in order to meet the pollution loading. And this is something that within the Willamette River, this affects about 2/3 of the county. The Willamette Basin is shown here on the map in blue. But there are also, DEQ is working on a mid-coast basin Tmdl, which would affect more of the northwest corner of the county, and then the Siuslaw Basin is also planned. And that all leads to DEQ is currently updating the Tmdl for Mercury on the Willamette River. The focus of this Tmdl, the mercury source is actually atmospheric. It primarily comes through the jet stream from Asia and deposits in our soil. And once it comes in contact with water in our stormwater system and then discharges into rivers and streams, it then methylizes, and from there it bioaccumulates in fish, and then we ingest fish, and then it becomes a health risk and health concern. So mercury is a big component of the items that DEQ and the activities that DEQ has set forth in their new Mercury Tmdl are very focused on stormwater runoff associated with sediment. So that's discharges from disturbed areas during construction, development, things like that. So they've basically taken all of the measures that are required in the urban Npdes permit, and they've put them in the Tmdl now. So that is what's happening moving forward with this Tmdl, is that a lot of the items that are associated with the urban stormwater infrastructure and the Npdes permit are now getting moved into a basin-wide Tmdl plan that we would then have to meet. So a lot of those requirements associated with construction runoff on private property would extend to 2/3 of the county. The Oregon, the counties in Oregon got together, and the AOC worked with DEQ, a little bit of the challenges associated with the more rural communities that these requirements are going to affect, and we're able to reduce some of those constraints. So we've heard from that internally from the AOC that they're removing some of the requirements of the Npdes from the Tmdl, but we're not sure until that gets finalized. January or February is what we're hearing. Dan's gonna close.
Okay, so thank you, Moria. So all this to say, there's a lot we're going to have to do for stormwater over the next 5 years. We knew this permit was coming. We knew it was going to be much more prescriptive and increase our requirements and the level of things we need to do to manage our stormwater. And we're at that point now, and it's going to impact our residents as we develop code, and it's going to impact our budget. Thank you for your time on this morning. I know stormwater isn't a very sexy topic, but it's important. You know, we all care about our rivers and our streams and the health of our fish and being able to use and recreate in our streams safely. And while this will add additional cost, this is something we need to do. Our rivers, most of them are listed as water quality limited by the DEQ for meeting the recreational, or not recreational, but their beneficial uses. So work needs to be done to protect our rivers and streams. How this will play out is we will need to develop new code. Our stormwater code is very, very weak. We have very few things to protect stormwater, particularly from erosion. When there's a development, our code says something just vaguely like no excessive grading, but there's no requirements to develop a plan really or to monitor. So we're going to have to develop more modern stormwater code and then apply that across these new areas. So specifically in the UGB areas where we partner with the cities, we'll have to look at those arrangements with the cities, our IGAs of how we manage that, and look at the code that they apply when development occurs. For the new areas in that map, those areas in green, those are areas that are now encompassed in this Npdes permit. They've never been applied. We've never had to apply that in those areas until now. So we have no stormwater code at this point that protects those areas. So we will be developing that over the next year and bringing that to you. And then this issue of the TMDL, whether we have to apply more prescriptive stormwater code across the entire Willamette Basin, which would affect most of the county. So we may have to develop as many as 4 different sets of stormwater codes for these different areas, and it's a lot of work that we're going to have to do together with Land Management Division and then bring that forward to you for consideration and adoption within these timelines. And it's going to affect our residents. As they develop properties, they'll be required to have on-site stormwater treatment, which affects the cost of their development and the acreage that they can develop. So you can expect to see some resistance around that, but we're going to have to meet this permit that's been placed on us by the state. The other part of it is the cost of it. When Moria showed that table there on the far right, we're looking at an increase of cost of about $4.8 million by 2024. That's very significant. Some of that can be absorbed by the road fund, but obviously then that impacts our ability to carry out our necessary roads projects. Part of it can't though. When we're talking about regulations on development, that's on private property, how properties are developed with construction and post-construction, we can't use road fund for that. So we're going to have to look at where we pay for that. And Land Management Division doesn't have extra money. Right now they're receiving $1 million a year that's collected by the Waste Management Division. So we would have to be looking at increasing our fees or looking at other options. One possible option would be to develop a stormwater fee, a stormwater utility. I think all of the cities shown there and some of the counties have a stormwater fee. We don't have that here in Lane County. And so in River Road, Santa Clara, for an example, you can have a neighbor that's next to another neighbor, one's in the city, one's in the county. The city is paying a monthly stormwater fee as part of their utility bill. The next door neighbor in the county is not paying anything for stormwater, and yet they're both receiving urban level stormwater services. So that's something we might want to look into. We looked into developing a stormwater utility and had a consultant do a report several years ago when we were looking at having to decommission all of our UICs, our dry wells, and then we put that on hold because DEQ did a 180 on having us remove those. We weren't looking at we were looking at about a $10 million cost over 3 years, and we weren't sure how we were going to fund that, so we started looking at a stormwater utility. I would like to bring that study back to you at some point and see if that's something that we would be interested in pursuing down the road, but we're going to have to find a way to cover that $4.8 million in the next few years. So that's why we're bringing that to you now. We're not asking for any decisions at this point, but wanted to set the stage because there's a lot of detail, as you picked up on, that goes into this program, and we'll be bringing these pieces, these code pieces, back over the next several months, and wanted you to understand why this is coming about. That concludes my part of it. Peggy, did you have anything to add? Okay, at this time, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're very interested in this topic, and thank you very much for your very significant overview of it. I think you mentioned, Mr. Hurley, you started getting into what I was going to ask, and that is the full roll-up out to 2025 was $8 million, of which 4 roughly is or 3 is roughly taken into the current projected budgets, but nearly 5 million is not. And I was curious about the difference between the previous estimate that it would cost us about 10 million to comply with the previous estimates that we had. Is that pretty much the same, or is that because of 8 is the total of 8 is a little bit more than 10, and with the length of time we're talking about, that's in the ballpark, or is it a completely different?
Completely different,
Okay.
two completely different programs.
Okay,
10 million I would-
help me
Yeah, sure.
understand.
The 10 million I was talking about was related to the dry wells. So we have about 70-ish dry wells in the River Road Santa Clara area. And at one point, the DEQ was saying those had to all be out in 3 years, which meant we would have to develop a stormwater system to convey that water elsewhere, a whole new system of pipes, or constructed rain gardens all around, which, acquiring property and placing those. So the dry wells are part of, that stems out of the Clean Water Act. So that's water that's going into groundwater, protecting drinking water. That's a completely separate program than the Npdes program, which is trying to protect surface waters that are going to our streams. So 2 different permits, 2 different program areas.
Right, and where, just in round numbers, where is this $4.8 million going to come from? Will it come from a stormwater fee that we have yet to?
That's what I would like to explore with you,
Okay.
Chair. We could just absorb it into our budgets, but that's going to be an impact on the services that we can carry out. So I would like to
Most
see
of
us
that
explore.
road fund eligible, that 4.8 million?
No, we haven't parsed it out. I'm not, maybe you have, Maria, but I would say maybe a half. I'm just, guessing. But a significant portion will not be, because we need to develop staff in the Land Management Division, a program to inspect when construction's happening, to make sure these stormwater facilities are being maintained. So that would all be non-road fund eligible.
I'm sure the other commissioners have questions. Do any commissioners want to be recognized? Commissioner Farr.
I just have a question. Thanks for the presentation. It's pretty eye-opening and sobering, the cost involved. And the first thing I always think of is, what's that going to do to the cost of housing? You can't answer that, but it's something that we would have to bear in mind, because every time we add layers of overhead, the ultimate payer is the person who's trying to live in a house. That being said, the question that I have is something that you mentioned, atmospheric mercury that comes in on the jet stream. Did I hear you correctly that a lot of the regulations have been predicated by atmospheric mercury coming in on the jet stream?
So there's a combination. There's mercury that naturally is occurring in Oregon, and there's also the atmospheric mercury that travels here on the jet stream. So
Which you said predominantly is from overseas.
It's predominantly from overseas.
So we're paying $4.8 million for what they're sending our way.
So
Plus what little bit is residual here.
That's just one parameter, and so they look at mercury as an indicator for other sediment coming into the river. So we do have high mercury around the Cottage Grove area, so the more we can do to protect erosion from happening when there is construction, that keeps that sediment from coming into the river. When we can have stormwater treatment and filtration from runoff elsewhere or from our streets, that keeps those pollutants, which it would include mercury, but lots of other pollutants, from entering our streams.
So you use the mercury as an indicator then?
Correct.
That's a good clarification. I didn't catch that from the first discussion, but so the levels of mercury indicate a broader spectrum of contaminants that may end up in our watershed. Right on. Now, a question you were asked a few weeks ago, none of this heavy metal going into our water is coming from our landfill though, right? It's not being trucked up the I-5 and dumped into our river from the landfill.
It is not dumped into our river. However, the landfill wastewater goes through the wastewater treatment plant. So the wastewater treatment plant is designed to remove various pollutants and have things settle out that would be metals. So the effluent from the wastewater treatment plant goes to the river. It's not 100% pure, but it meets the permit requirements set by the state for discharge.
Well, Matt was in here when that statement was made, and you both kind of bristled at the fact that our landfill puts heavy metals into the watershed, so.
We do not dump to the river. That goes.
I just had that one question. You cleared it very much. Thank you very much.
Commissioner?
Thanks. Actually, with our new fish consumption rules, we discharge from our treatment plant to the river in a condition cleaner than the river is. So us adding heavy metals to the river is very much a misnomer. But that's neither here nor there. So I'm going to say it wrong, but Moria?
Yeah, it's Moria, just combination of Maureen and Maria.
Okay.
Moria.
Moria.
Gloria.
Okay. Moria. Okay. Yeah, I know I got it wrong, but I get excited about stormwater because I spent a good portion of my engineering career doing stormwater management. And I actually came from a state that led the nation in stormwater management, and it's the state of Maryland, because they started initiatives after Hurricane Agnes and the horrible floods there to do quantity control. First state in the nation to have a statewide regulations around flood control and urban stormwater runoff control for development. And then they started having an issue with the rockfish dying in the bay and the oyster beds and all that, so they had to save the Chesapeake Bay Initiative, which led to first erosion control laws in the nation, and then second stormwater quality control laws in the nation. So when I moved out here to Oregon in '93, I was absolutely flabbergasted at the lack of any sort of stormwater regulation. And even requirements to get off-site discharge permits for systems, the fact that you were allowed to inject stormwater I was just like, dumbstruck. But we're catching up slowly, and it's kind of funny because I kind of see Oregon made some of the same mistakes Maryland did at times, which was at first trying to buy into infiltration as being one of the cure-alls for everything, and converting a surface water quality problem into a groundwater quality problem, and they've learned some of the mistakes made there. But one of the things I look at, and particularly in this map, almost all the green areas are floodplain or the airport. There's very little that's not. So I'm not real concerned about adding some of the green areas because really the city of Eugene ought to be responsible for the airport. And we'll need to talk to them about that. The secondary thing is, our statewide planning goals require, if you have a UGB, you should have a plan for stormwater because it is an urban service. Now, the city of Springfield has a stormwater master plan, at least they did back in the 90s when I used to do a lot of development work. And you could look on there and see how they were going to develop their stormwater transmission system to the surface waterways and all that, and service the neighborhoods as they develop. There is virtually none for the city of Eugene, particularly in River Road, Santa Clara. No planning for stormwater. So as we think about things like having to get rid of UICs, there's no place to take them because there's no system to connect to. So one of the first things I would lean towards is, because most of this is a UGB issue, is we need to lean hard on the cities to complete their master plans and see how, we fit into that. And as they annex and develop they're supposed to be prepared to annex these areas and develop them and provide urban level of service. That's one of the things we should be looking at. And then secondary to that, if there is a need to collect some kind of fee, a lot of this area is either served by one of the other utility districts that the municipalities control, and we'll need to probably work with them in some sort of IGA for that fee collection system. We don't have the ability to do that really. And with that brings about another issue that has always kind of stuck on me is I believe we are grossly undercompensated for the areas of both those utilities that extend into county areas as far as a fee in lieu of taxes. When you talk about EWEB, and if we're looking for a funding source, yeah, we might want to talk about fairly distributing some of that quote, I don't know if they call it a silt contribution in lieu of taxes. That's the way they refer to it, and the City of Eugene does from EWEB. And whether or not the county is getting a fair share of that, which I don't think we are. So, you know, that's one of the first places I would look for maybe a funding source. But we really have to look at this as a master planning issue in some ways, because, you know, great development, we can put in regulations. In Maryland, I could count on developers understanding that 7% of their site was going to go to a stormwater system. It was a set, easy thing for me to figure out that there was going to be 7% needed for some kind of quantity and quality control device. And they just knew they were going to lose 7% of their site at the downstream end somewhere. You know, and that was just, you know, a matter of working into equation. We don't have that quite built into the mindset of developers here, but it should be. But streets and linear systems don't lend themselves to on-site. So there has to be at least some kind of planning for regional treatment facilities, regional transmission of stormwater. That has to be master planned. You can't deal with that one-off. And if we're going to eventually try and get rid of our injection systems that are basically a conversion of a surface water to a groundwater contamination issue, we have to have that infrastructure in place eventually and a way of funding it, you know. And if you don't have a master plan, then you can't develop a capital plan, then you can't develop a funding stream to support that capital plan. So, but who should be doing that master planning? Lane County or the cities that are planning for urbanizing their UGBs?
Commissioner, if I could speak to that. The City of Eugene, one, they have been a great partner. They have helped us in many ways along the road. They are a phase 1 permittee, so they're farther along in the development of stormwater programs. But we've also partnered with them on their stormwater basin master planning for the River Road Santa Clara area. So they have done stormwater master plans for, I think they have 8 basins. Their last one took them quite a bit longer because they did it in conjunction with us in the River Road Santa Clara area. So the board co-adopted that stormwater basin master plan probably 2010. So that does describe how the system would need to be changed as UICs are decommissioned. That was a big focus of it, and does plan out all their outlets. So we have not done a stormwater. I think the point is a great one about that this should fit into a master plan. We have not done that, particularly for these new areas that have been added, the green areas. We don't have a plan around how that should be, and it should mesh with the city plans that are adjacent to those areas.
Yeah, but I guess some of the green areas, though, like I said, most of them are floodplain and gravel pits.
We may not see a lot of development.
And they're not going to see a lot of development, and I don't know what our responsibilities are there. But I would look towards, what, as funding mechanisms go, I would look towards silt and an equitable share of silt as a possibility. And then also, I'm sure there's going to be a need to look at, once we have some kind of master plan and some kind of capital plan that goes with it, then you can look at some kind of system development charge on new development possibilities as a portion of that. That doesn't deal with your maintenance. That's a capital issue to a certain degree. We may want to talk with the city a little bit, though, but I've long been a critic of how the city of Eugene has spent their stormwater fees. I felt that they have not spent it on infrastructure and have spent it on, comical ads with referees and fancy manhole covers and personnel, and not really in the ground where it should have been spent. And that's just a personal criticism from an aside as one that worked in the development community and one that worked at a utility. Yeah, I can't imagine if I had been spending water SDCs in that way at EWEB, how I would have been criticized. So need to work with our partners a lot on this issue. It's not our problem. And I will say, yes, Mercury is just kind of an indicator for us about erosion. And that's just, you can just tell we have not had good, we just barely have gotten into construction site management planning and inspection, let alone just generalized erosion prevention in this area like the East Coast has.
Commissioner Burney.
If you want to go first.
I'll go for it.
Okay. I don't quite have the background that the previous commissioner does, so I just like to make a couple of statements and ask a very simple question. One, since we're all here, I just want the Board of Commissioners to know and to acknowledge, Dan, you for the really incredible job you did yesterday with the meeting of all the people that went to San Jose to look at, a multiple stream industrial recycling kind of opportunity. And I would like you all to know that from Rexius to Sanapac to PacTech to bulk handling, et cetera, everybody is staying involved and engaged, and it really is under Dan's leadership. So thank you very much. I know that. And my other statement is it's amazing to me how many people that are doing significant things came from Deadwood. What's in the water there? Oh, we're talking about. My question is simple. As we're looking at the chart, stormwater program, financial forecasting, and we're looking at budget shortfalls you presented, are these, and the first budget shortfall occurs in 2020, 2021, are these annual shortfalls for each of those years or cumulative?
They're annual.
So really, the shortfall cumulatively is, I didn't do the math, but it looks like it's probably closer to about $14 million, not $4 million.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Well, I'll just wrap this up by saying, first and foremost, thank you for all the great work you're doing. Secondly, this is a big number, and I think that Mr. Hurley's suggestion that we take this up again is a good one. I'm going to leave it to you as to suggest the date and time of that, and through the normal process of bringing items to the Board of Commissioners from the department. I will say that it's good that local jurisdictions around the United States, cities and counties, have been trying to figure out how to comply with these Clean Water Act requirements, and they're in place for a reason, and that is that this is a national resource of our nation's waters, and that's where people recreate, that's where people get sometimes their drinking water, that's where people use that water for industrial, commercial, agricultural, residential purposes, and it's our job to do our part in trying to clean that water up, make it as clean as possible. And I do believe Lane County is behind other jurisdictions in imposing appropriate fees in order to pay for the cost of the water cleanup. And I think we're behind. I think we need to be doing more sooner. And this is one step, in my view, towards the goal of helping to clean up that water. And we should never underestimate the significance to the American people, let alone the people here in Oregon that really value the natural environment, of how important it is to have clean water. And municipal sources of water pollution, whether it's a direct discharge, such as the wastewater management permit that we have as a community, or whether it's the individual acts of all of us who drive on a road or have a driveway or have some other kind of runoff. It's really important that we, in my view, redouble our efforts to try to clean that water up. And thank you so much for all your great work, and we'll just leave it in your hands as to when you come back next. All right? Thank you so much. Okay, we are now ready to revisit, for any commissioners that want to do so, our items 13B and C for any agenda team requests or work session requests. I don't see any, but I'd like to invite the commissioners if they want to propose any. Okay, seeing none, I think we'll go on to our review of assignments, item 14. Mr. Mokryski, you want to do that for us?
I don't have any, Mr. Chair.
Okay, very good. At this time, we are going to move to our executive session, and Mr. Mokryski, if you could alert our friends at Lane Council of Governments and also the folks that need to get the room ready. We'll be reading in our executive session here, item 15. We'll be, after I finish doing that, we'll be recessing to the Board of Commissioners conference room, and if any media is here, you can start moving up to the Board of Commissioners conference room. So, the Board of Commissioners will now meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations and to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602D and E, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back into public session should the need arise. So at this time, I am recessing the Board of Commissioners for 5 minutes, and we will reconvene in the Board of Commissioners conference room.